About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
Yes, this is Noetic Moments, where we explore the field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. I'm Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and anthropology. And through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and their experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. And Noetic is spelled Noetic. Well, this is our 60th program. And since we began this program, we've focused on the various models people have developed to explain our mental and emotional experience and the experiments that have supported those models. From the earliest scientific explorations, we learned that most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From those early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects. What we're aware of, we've been calling that our personal awareness. What we aren't aware of, that's keeping our bodies going and also includes our fears and beliefs about potential threats and dangers, which we'll call the individual subconscious, and what we aren't aware of that enlivens our beings and guides us in our actions, which we can call the individual superconscious. From later research, we learned that we can change our state of consciousness and shift what aspects of mind we are aware of and what we're capable of in the moment. And we learned that while it's possible to say where in the brain various processes are active, no one has yet been able to demonstrate where memories are stored or what the pathway is by which ideas and thoughts emerge in the brain. We also saw that the responses in our body to both our individual mental activity and what's going on around us happen far faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel through the body. So it's clear that who and what we are, our consciousness, and our decisions and choices aren't all originating in the brain. As a result, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is in fact the activity of a kind of field that surrounds and permeates the whole body, which some researchers and the teachers of ancient traditions that we can call shamans have suggested it looks like a glowing egg shape extending from below our knees to a few inches above our heads. This field appears to be at least partly electromagnetic because it's possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches and even several feet around the body. These researchers suggest that the brain is best understood as a receiver-transmitter. It receives messages from the mind and transmits them to the body, and receives messages from the senses and transmits those to the body and the mind as well. We then learned that the brain modifies whatever it receives, from both the senses and the mind, to fit past patterns of experience that are stored as hardwired connections among the neurons, following Begg's principle that, quote, neurons that fire together wire together, unquote, in what's been called the default network, which means we see, hear, and feel what we expect or believe we will experience. Other experiments we looked at demonstrated that what we call the individual mind seems to continue to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person has been declared dead. This may explain why most reports from those who've been through such experiences do not fit the patterns of expectation stored in their brain's neuronal connections. Mind, then, is a field, a pattern of energy that exists during and after the body is functioning, as the superconscious. It permeates and develops with the body and brain, as the subconscious, and is being told by the sensory parts of the brain what the world out there is like, our personal awareness. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibration that's different from other fields, and some experiments have demonstrated that people and some animals have minds that are vibrating along similar patterns. That is, they resonate with each other. Such resonant minds are able to sense when the other is focusing attention on them or is about to come home. Their bodies have been measured to change in subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways when someone they're connected with turns the attention their way, even though they can't see or hear them doing so. Seeing this, we begin to understand how bodies and environments shift and change as people change their thought processes, what they're focusing on in the personal awareness aspect of their consciousness. It also explains the effectiveness of mental or spiritual healing and what's called the placebo effect, how the belief of a care provider in a treatment can help a patient receiving that treatment experience relief from symptoms. And we're going to talk about that a lot more today. As we've gone along, we've learned that mind does affect matter in a variety of ways. We can use the famous double-slit experiments in quantum physics, where the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or matter, depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. And in the collective human mind's ability to change the readouts on random number generators on the network of computers run by the Princeton Global Consciousness Project. Because of the nature of fields, and because things like the Global Consciousness Project exist, a growing number of scientists are seeing our individual field of mind as part of a larger field, a collective consciousness, a noosphere, or a global brain. And more scientists are equating that larger field with the quantum or zero-point field, out of which all matter and energy arises in this orderly system we call the universe. A field that has been called the Akashic field, using a Sanskrit term that means, quote, the essence of everything that exists in the material world, end quote. And some scientists are even beginning to use the equations that describe basic physics, quantum physics, and computer learning algorithms to help describe the role of consciousness in the formation of our material world, reinforcing the idea that some have held for many centuries, that thoughts are a creative force in our experience. Based on all of that, we began to explore some more popular understandings of how the mind works, including the way the world around us reflects what we've been focusing on in what's often called the law of attraction, the way we can access information in the quantum or Akashic field through insight, intuition, and the increasingly understood process of channeling, the way dreams and the dreaming process affects the body and relates to our greater consciousness, and the way music affects brain, body, and how individual mind connects with the greater mind field. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips, books, and authors that I mention. Well, this is our 60th show, and now that we've pretty much established that mind affects matter, and particularly that it affects our bodies, we're going to spend a few weeks exploring the healing process. Last week, we learned about how health and wellness need to be thought of in terms of much more than the body, and how a few minutes spent in an elevated emotion of gratitude for several days in a row leads to great improvements in the immune system. This week, I want to explore how that works. First, let's start with the body's reactions to distress and disease. Basically, the body has 5 responses, 4 physical and 1 mental. The body will do everything it can to flush out something that it doesn't think belongs there. If that doesn't work, it will burn it out in what we call a fever. And if that doesn't work, it'll seal it off with scar tissue or a new membrane that's formed or some other way to keep whatever it doesn't think belongs there affecting the rest of the whole. And ultimately, if it can't do that, it will shut down resources to the affected part to literally cause that part to separate from the body. This is a pretty powerful thing we live in and use and rely on. Now, the 5th thing that happens is that the body will slip out of our personal awareness, disconnecting from the normal or default thought structure in order to stop the messages that are telling the body to do all of these things. Now, all of these are effective, and sometimes several of them happen at once, which is when we usually call a doctor and ask for something to stop it. But, well, that may not be the most effective thing to do. Some people, and this and other cultures, have found that for them, heating the body still further when it's in the burn-it-out mode, in a very hot bath or with heating pads, assists the body in burning out what doesn't belong there, so they can get up from that period of being overheated, free of whatever it is the body is trying to burn out. Many healing practitioners say that if the body is flushing out toxins, help it along with more fluids instead of trying to stop the flushing out. Now, I know it's not comfortable when the body is eliminating fluids through every orifice, but if we can drink a lot of fluids, especially with electrolytes, like in strong broth or juice with vitamins in it, we can help the cells avoid going too far out of balance while the rest of whatever it is that does not belong in the body is released from the body, and the body can be restored to health. A third approach that's been used in many parts of this world is intentionally sleeping or going into a deep trance. And you can see this. A lot of animals do this, yes? It may be more useful than waiting till the body goes into a coma to try to stop the messages from the normal thought structure, the default structure, that have been contributing to the distress. Which brings us, of course, to the role of mind in all of this. Now remember, mind is a field of energy connected with all other minds in the collective mind of humanity and beyond. And it's not subject to the issues of the body or to that thought structure wired in the brain. So mind can help out in at least 2 ways. Mind, our own minds, our own sub- and superconscious minds, can override the thought structure that's contributing to the distress in the body. And that same mind that is our own mind can access other possible states of being besides the distress, which the normal default thought structure is focused on and recreating. So how is that possible? We need to remember that the brain is a receiver-transmitter. It modifies what it receives to fit the patterns wired into it of past experiences and expectations and beliefs. If it has heard the same message over and over for weeks or months or years at a time, it will tend to wire that message into its default structure and transmit it to the body in accordance with that message. Now, you may recall a couple weeks back we talked about music in the body, and one of the things that one of our guest speakers said was that her brother had begun to experience in his life what he had been listening to for years in the songs that he listened to. And we all have had that experience, whether we knew it or not. If we are hearing it over and over again, we're very likely to start experiencing it. The default structure will choose in that direction and transmit that message to the body. And the message that it's flu season, or I'm allergic, or when this happens, I always react, or anything like that, are the kinds of messages that get wired in. So if you've been saying those things over and over again, then you're probably going to experience them in the physical body. Another message, one delivered from an authority when we're in what's called a subjective state, such as watching a TV or movie or sitting in church or in a hospital or doctor's office, is even more likely to get wired in, even without repetition. But when it's repeated, we can almost guarantee that our default thought structure will accept and filter all messages in alignment with those ideas. So if we've been told that we will have or do have a certain condition with specific symptoms and outcomes, either over and over or while we're in that subjective state, the brain will have wired that in and will send messages to the body to react accordingly. Hormones sent to specific organs and cells to behave accordingly. Fluid flows restricted or increased in specific areas in accordance with those messages. And immune system activity increased or decreased, as we heard from Joe Dispenza last week in his experiments where people's immune systems were enhanced 50 to 100% simply by being grateful for 10 minutes every day for 4 days. Wow. The opposite is what occurs with these other messages. So all of these things, the hormones going to specific organs and cells that are inappropriate, fluid flows that are either restricted or increased inappropriately, and immune system activity increased or decreased inappropriately, results in symptoms of discomfort, distress, and disease. Autoimmune diseases are exactly what we're talking about here, but also many flu, allergy, etc. symptoms, infectious symptoms, asthma. We know there's a high correlation between emotional states and many of these illnesses or symptoms. So the healing process is simply reversing those messages. It's not about stopping the symptoms, which, yes, is what most of modern medicine and pharmacology is about. But instead, healing is about changing the message from the brain to the body so that the body can revert back to normal, healthy operation. Now, this is what hypnosis and most faith healers, energy healers, spiritual healing methods do. They change the thought processes so the brain stops telling the body to do the things that are not in alignment with its true, healthy nature. This is a big difference from what our culture has been telling us. This is a huge shift. But thousands of people over hundreds of years in the U.S. have experienced a cessation of symptoms forever, for the rest of their lifetimes, in this way. Now, how does this happen? Well, over the past years' programs, we've learned that the subconscious mind is what makes the body function, and that messages from the subconscious mind are received by the brain and transmitted to the body. We learned that the superconscious mind is associated with ideals and potentials, and that messages from the superconscious mind are also received by the brain and transmitted to the body. All of these messages are filtered by that normal default thought structure, which governs our personal awareness and much of what goes on in the body. So that thought structure must be shut down and transformed for those messages to get to the body without its past filters. Now, we've also learned that both the subconscious and the superconscious are part of a larger field of mind, from which all matter and energy emerge. Mind, as Einstein and Niels Bohr used to say, is the basis for matter. Quote, "The field determines the particle," end quote. So our job in healing is to create a field in which the matter that makes up our body can be restored to its natural, balanced, fully functioning state. We're going to spend more time on this with more details over the weeks to come. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, and how our lives could be better if we understood it more fully. I'm Ruth Miller, and that sound tells me it's time to look ahead and look at what's going on around us. Today, I want to look at the books that could support what I've been saying so far. There are many of them out there, but there are some key works that I think you might find useful. The first one is Carolyn Myss's Anatomy of the Spirit. Now, Myss is spelled M-Y-S-S. Anatomy of the Spirit is her first powerful entry into this world. We talked about it a while back, and it helps us understand the relationship between our emotional state and our physical experiences. And she helps people to see how it is that shifting the mental state can facilitate shifting the body state. Bruce Lipton's book, The Biology of Belief, helps us to understand how the body responds to thoughts and emotions. How does it work? He talks about the structure of the cell and the fact that our thinking and our feeling state leads to the release of various hormones, and those hormones are fed into the cell wall, and those cell wall receptors then filter those down into the cell, and different proteins are created, different activities go on in each cell based on the thoughts and emotions and the hormones associated with them. Joe Dispenza's book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, and all the workshops and meditations he offers as well, provides methods for transforming that default thought structure really quickly and building a new one that is in alignment with who we know ourselves to potentially be. In other words, shifting the functioning of the brain from that default thought structure that is based on the past to a new thought structure based on what the superconscious has to offer in the way of potential. Now, I have a couple of books that may be useful. One is called Empowered Care, that I wrote with Robert Bruce Newman, who is an expert in Tibetan meditation methods. And we explain how those meditation methods work in the body and why they work. And we provide a number of very specific meditations. And we also have some CDs to support that book, Empowered Care and the Calm Healing CDs. The other book that I've written is called The Science of Mental Healing, and it is a history of the process by which individuals have helped thousands of people using the method of transforming their belief systems from ones that induce disease and distress to ones that support well-being at every level of being. In this book, what I aimed to do was describe the life and the learning and ultimately the teaching of each of the major people who have moved this field of what I'm calling mental healing, they might call it spiritual healing, forward. What principles they experienced and learned, and how they made it possible for other people to benefit from that learning. I plan to use a lot of material from that book over the next few weeks. I hope you will find it useful and interesting. In the meantime, take a look at these other books and see what you think, or go online and listen to Bruce Lipton or Carolyn Myss's early work, or to the work of folks like Joe Dispenza, as they are helping people transform their belief systems and begin to understand how life can really work. Okay, well, I have to say that's it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll look at more of the research being done in an attempt to understand what consciousness is, what it really does, and how we can experience life differently when we use it fully. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there's a list of the titles and other resources we refer to on the show, along with archived past shows, and where you can send me your comments and questions, which I'll do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.